Hello, and thank you for joining us for an award-winning strategy for public participation, How Pittsburgh Engaged 20,000. We're thrilled to host the City of Pittsburgh talking about Engaged PGH. This has just been an exceptional ride to watch, and I know that there's so many people interested in this topic. We have over 800 people registered for today's webinar. I know there's many people from the social Pinpoint community, so welcome to them. I know there's many people from the MetroQuest community because 8 months ago, MetroQuest was thrilled to join forces with social Pinpoint. So we're kind of combining forces here. So welcome to our MetroQuest community, folks. And there's newcomers. So welcome to this webinar. This webinar series is really designed to help us learn from each other, kind of a peer-to-peer exchange, and discuss what's working and discuss best practices and how to succeed with public engagement. I really want to thank the American Planning Association and the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation for co-sponsoring today's webinar. Much appreciation for those partnerships. My name is Dave Biggs. My role here at Social Pinpoint is Public Engagement Strategist. I am thrilled to be co-hosting today's webinar with, I think, the perfect person to co-host this webinar. Sophia Robison is the head of practice at Social Pinpoint. Before her role at Social Pinpoint, Sophia was involved with the planning department at no less than the City of Pittsburgh. So she knows so much of the context here, and so she's going to be a great co-pilot for today's webinar. She's focused at Social Pinpoint on building and supporting a community of best practices around public engagement with a focus on digital public engagement. So really appreciate Sophia for co-hosting today's webinar with me. We're going to hear from Sophia in just a few minutes. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about the state of the practice in public engagement. Now, let's face it, over the past few years, we have been tested in several areas relating to public engagement. The first and kind of the obvious one with the pandemic is we've seen a dramatic increase in the role and the importance of online public engagement. Now, this is coming from the pandemic, but it's also, we've seen a dramatic shift in the expectations of the public that there be a digital way to engage with agencies. And so there's been a dramatic shift there towards online engagement. At the same time, we're seeing increasing pressure and calls for diversity, equity, and inclusion, to really be raising our game on DEI, as it's called. That's coming from the ground up, the public pressure, but it's also coming from leadership. And it's raised questions because of the movement towards digital engagement. It's raised questions about whether the digital divide makes that more difficult and how to deal with that effectively. So these two areas are challenging each other. And the third one is, if that wasn't enough of a challenge, the third one is many agencies are reporting real limitations in terms of staff and resources available for public engagement. So these are the things that we heard back from the community about the kind of the state of where things are at with respect to public engagement. And one of the reasons that I'm so excited to be hosting this webinar is the City of Pittsburgh has met these challenges absolutely head on. Over the past few years, right early in the pandemic, they launched Engage PGH, digital engagement platform, and they saw exponential growth in both their projects, the number of projects they were hosting, as well as the participation in their that they were seeing online. They have so many different departments around the city. Now, this started with them for a single project and it's grown. Well, I'm going to let them tell you how it's grown, but it's really been quite wonderful to see. I really am enthusiastic when they talk about the efficiency gains and the coordination that the platform has helped them achieve between departments. Let's take a look at Engage PGH by the numbers. Now, it's important to know that the population of Pittsburgh is 300,000 people. They have engaged over 240,000 visitors and had over 500,000 views on Engage PGH. They have received over 34,000 contributions, and those are contributions like comments or pins on maps, completed online surveys, these sort of things from over 20,000 contributors. So this is certainly an award-winning public engagement example. And speaking of awards, they are the proud recipients of the IAP2 Core Values Award for the Organization of the Year. Now, if you're familiar with the International Association for Public Participation, you'll know that the Organization of the Year is one of the most difficult and sought after categories in their award process. And you can see from the image here, this is Mayor Gainey in the middle, surrounded by the panel, just beaming with pride over what they achieved with Engage PGH. And when you hear Mayor Gainey talking about this, I really love how he talks about the role of the platform in breaking down silos across the city. And it's also wonderful to know about the public's love for the platform. And he talks passionately about that as well. They're also just a wonderful group of people. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Audrey Wells. Audrey serves as the digital communications specialist at the City of Pittsburgh in the mayor's office, and she collaborates with a head-spinning number of departments around the city. So please welcome Audrey Wells. Over to you, Audrey.
Thanks so much, Dave. And thank you so much for that warm welcome. Yeah, we are thrilled to be here today to talk a little bit about Pittsburgh's journey to civic engagement. But before we kind of get into it, I want to kick us off by introducing you to myself and to some of the other people that you're going to be hearing from today. So like Dave said, I'm Audrey Wells. I am the digital communications specialist here at the City of Pittsburgh, and I'm especially excited to be here because I had the privilege of managing this platform for about 2 years. And then to kind of place you with some of the other folks you're going to be hearing from today, you're going to be hearing from our Assistant Director of Strategic Planning, Sharonda Whatley, who has a wealth of experience in comprehensive planning. You're going to hear from Jan Raether, who does a lot of engagement work around specifically around infrastructure with our departments of Public Works and Mobility and Infrastructure. You're going to hear from Marty Wolf Battistone, who is a principal planner in sustainability and resilience, does a lot of our parks planning work. Laura Tsutsui, who has really taken up the mantle of Engage PGH. And as Dave alluded to, you're going to hear from Sophia Robison, who we have very fond memories of her here at the City of Pittsburgh, and who we still very luckily get to work with in her role at Social Pinpoint. I think it's important to kind of kick this off by talking about what got us here in the first place. So we started out with what we call our public engagement guide, and that was an effort that was started in 2017 to kind of give planners and other people who are doing engagement work a framework for how we are engaging with folks. And we developed this with our residents, with community organizations, and then with folks that are working within the Department of City Planning. And one of our main takeaways from this public engagement guide is this idea of a public engagement spectrum. But what the public engagement kind of built out as a spectrum, we kind of started to think about as a pyramid, right? So the first level in that public engagement spectrum is the idea of informing residents, right? And that is a foundational piece of the work that we do. In order for somebody to be involved in any sort of meaningful way, we have to make sure that they first have all of the information that they need up front. So we look at this idea of informing folks as the foundation for all of our engagements. This helps us to build a dialogue as we work our way up. So, if people have the necessary information, they can kind of help us see that vision through. And it allows us to work together to test ideas, to brainstorm, and to kind of create a vision for projects. And it also holds us accountable to report back on outcomes, right? So we're informing people on what the project's doing. We're taking their feedback, and then we're reporting that information back out to them to make sure that we're being held accountable for the work that we're doing. And so to kind of see how that played out before COVID and before the launch of Engage PGH, we're going to flip it to Sophie to kind of talk about how we started working this framework into some of our neighborhood plans.
Thanks, Audrey. I'm going to speak for a moment about the project that actually prompted the creation of Engage PGH. And this was the Oakland Plan. If you're familiar with Pittsburgh, this is the University District in the City of Pittsburgh. It's where the University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, and the UPMC hospital system are all located. In the summer of 2019, when I was still working there, we embarked on a process of doing a series of open houses around urban design in Oakland. This involved a number of in-person events held centrally in the neighborhood. There was parking, and it involved a lot of resources and a lot of effort from our community liaisons to bring people into this space. In estimation, we think there was about 104 hours of work involved across 6 to 8 staff in running these open houses. And you can see from these pictures kind of what these open houses looked like. And this was done entirely in person. Throughout the course of all of that effort and these 2 in-person events, we think we got about 100 people to attend the open houses, 44 of whom completed surveys. I'm going to toss it back to Audrey to talk a little bit more about some of the shift that happened during the pandemic, and then I'll come back to talk about how the Oakland Plan changed once we added digital engagement tools.
So Sophie kind of showed you that we got a lot of momentum starting off with the Oakland Plan, and then, as we all know, March of 2020, everything shut down. We weren't able to, be in person, do any of those typical engagements that we had been doing in the city of Pittsburgh up until that point. And so we, in order to continue that momentum, partnered with Social Pinpoint to launch this platform to give Pittsburgh an opportunity to kind of get into the digital engagement sphere, specifically for the Oakland Neighborhood Plan. And while this started as a really concentrated effort, it very quickly grew into something more. And now it's expanded to almost every single department, different offices within those departments who are utilizing this platform all across the city. And we have a grouping of, just to kind of give you an understanding of how we utilize the platform, we have a grouping of 3 projects that we have on our pages. The first one is an open project. So that is a project that is currently happening and is actively accepting feedback. So there's one of those 40 tools that Social Pinpoint has on their platform that we can use to kind of garner feedback from our residents. The next is an active project. So that goes back to that idea of informing our residents. Those are projects that are currently happening, but don't have an active engagement on it. So those are ones that we're really leaning into making sure that folks are up to date on what's happening in the process, what phase of construction we're in, or if we're in design, et cetera, et cetera. And then one thing that I think is really important that folks don't always think about is this third category of a closed project. So a closed project is something that it's essentially what I like to call a living archive. It's one of those things where the project is not happening anymore. It's been completed. It's an implementation. But there is a record that it happened. There's a history of all of the engagements. There are links to council hearings if there was legislation involved in getting those projects through and different things like that. So folks have an idea of seeing a project from beginning to end and then being able to go back and see how we got there. And then with that, I'll toss it back to Sophie to talk a little bit more about, once we launched Engage PGH, what engagement around the Oakland Plan looked like.
Thanks, Audrey. So then in the fall of 2020, we came back to the Oakland plan. As Audrey mentioned, we had all of this momentum and we didn't have the correct tools in order to sort of action that momentum into the needed engagement we needed, to keep moving this project forward. And so we did another series of online open houses, and this time exclusively in an online environment. And I do want to just give the note that this is a case study of a specific project. The projects that Pittsburgh continues to do today integrate both in-person and online engagement, but in this particular instance, it's a really powerful story because it shows the exclusively in-person and then the exclusively online, and how they combined these going forward is kind of the rest of the story here. So during this online open house, this happened over the course of 2 months, and people were able to participate whenever they could over the course of those 2 months. This was advertised really broadly through social media. We also reached out to those community leaders and community liaisons and gave them information to share out to their own communities and ask them to participate and really sort of disseminate this in a fun grassroots way. We estimate that putting together the online open house took about 20 hours of staff time over the course of those 8 weeks. And there were 2 staff involved in this. It was myself and a colleague, Derek Dauphin, who did some really amazing work following through the Oakland plan over the last few years. Over the course of those 8 weeks, there were almost 2,500 visitors to the site, 785 of whom completed surveys. So that's a really powerful difference when you compare it to the amount of effort involved in the in-person open house and then adding this online open house. And so as the next few speakers continue, you'll be able to see how combining these strategies together has created an award-winning engagement approach for the city of Pittsburgh. So a couple things that you're going to see as we move through the Oakland plan are what contributed to the success of this engagement. Diving into that a little bit and what this online open house looked like. Going online allowed people to participate where they are. So one of the engagement terms that we see used today is this idea of continuous or asynchronous engagement. And it's the idea that it's not actually an online public meeting. People can participate from the comfort of their own homes whenever they want to and whenever they can, whether that's at 9 a.m. or 10 p.m. or the middle of the day. We also used for the Oakland plan a variety of different engagement tools. So this allowed people to participate if they had 5 minutes. They could quick participate in a single poll like the one you're seeing on the screen there, or they could participate in a more long form survey or an open-ended visioning exercise. And those were really fun and allowed people to see what their neighbors were thinking and really contribute to that larger scale visioning process. That's a really important part of neighborhood planning. Throughout this entire process, not just that one online open house, but over the course of about 2 years, the Oakland plan engaged over 18,500 visitors. And that was a really powerful audience to reach in a neighborhood that oftentimes we see a much smaller engagement. And really exciting also to see some of those visitors include students, professionals who were a little bit harder to reach, as well as more diverse communities. And diving into focus groups and bringing them into these spaces was a really effective tool for reaching broader audiences. Through that, we were able to collect almost 4,000 contributions. And for a neighborhood plan, that's pretty transformational. What it allowed us to do is to take these ideas from a very diverse neighborhood and translate them into a very effective vision statement and series of policy statements. Now this project is an implementation. What you're seeing on the screen is actually an overview of an online design charrette that we did. And that's been a really great piece of implementation that's been being actioned over the last year or two as this project has been in implementation. And being able to see those ideas come to life on individual blocks within this area has been really exciting. Other things that came out of the Oakland plan were the idea of how we engaged with specific steering committees and action teams. These would have been smaller groups that met on a regular basis. And traditionally, these would have been done at in-person meetings, centrally located in the neighborhood. During COVID, we had to move these into an online space. And so it created this actual, I kind of described it like an online binder of sorts, where the action teams and the steering committees always knew how to find that constant source of truth about where we were in the process and what data they could engage with in order to continue participating in the plan. And so you'll see over there on the left-hand side some of the questions that were asked of the transportation and mobility action team, and asking them, for example, about how they traveled pre-COVID through the neighborhood. On the right-hand side, you can see where the page is now today, which is in implementation. And the plan, to Audrey's earlier point around an archived project, is currently updating people on how the plan is being implemented. And so you can not only see what those updates are, but you can also dive into a master list of the projects that are meant to be outcomes of the planning process, see where they are in their own stage. And if there's a subsequent engagement page for those respective projects, you can jump into those. And so it's really an effort to some of Audrey's ideas around hubs, to bring people to the platform for one project and have them stay for another as you move through time. Now I'm going to toss it over to Sharonda, and Sharonda is going to speak to a residential permit parking program.
Thanks, Sophie. Hey there. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sharonda Whatley. I'm the Assistant Director of Strategic Planning here in the Department of City Planning for the City of Pittsburgh. And as you heard earlier, not only were we using the Engage PGH platform for long-range planning and neighborhood planning, we've also begun to use it for code updates and program administration updates. And so one such program was the residential parking sort of program and permit process. And so back in 2021, the department was really interested in transferring the administration of that program to our local parking authority. So if you know anything about Pittsburgh, you know that it is an older city, and it is also a city that has some really interesting topography. And so the entire city is full of hills and valleys. So this means that many of our residential structures and dwellings were not developed with specific parking lots or garages attached onto the properties and onto the sites. So on-street parking is a very sort of hot topic and critical issue across the city. And so the availability of that parking is super important to residents and business owners. And so as we were looking to transfer the administration of that process to the parking authority, we also thought it was a really great opportunity to look at how or other ways that we can improve that particular permit process. And so with that, we put out a survey again back in 2021, and we were able to have a number of those surveys completed. So over 2,000 surveys were completed and returned back to the city through the Engage PGH platform, and we were able to use that to better inform how we can administer that particular project. And so those types of numbers are definitely unheard of, especially when we used to rely on sort of the in-person or townhouse style or open house style meetings. And so being able to have some sort of a hybrid approach to engagement, to getting feedback from residents and business owners and property owners is key to how we are creating effective change with some of these programs and some of these processes. So some of the things that we asked were, is there enough residential parking for your street or in your area? Some other things that we asked in that survey is if people would be interested in an increase in parking fees for better code enforcement and better enforcement of that those parking areas. And so as you can see, again, we got really robust responses to that, and that actually informed the updates to that code for the residential parking program. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name's Jan Raether. I'm the infrastructure engagement specialist in the mayor's office. Work really closely with our Department of Public Works and our Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, engaging residents on traffic safety and transportation improvements in the city of Pittsburgh. And one of the examples I'm going to talk about is the East Liberty Corridors and Safety Plan. So this is a project that is intended to address some of the traffic and mobility challenges that stemmed from an urban renewal project in the 60s that really focused on cars over the pedestrian experience and trying to undo that. And so our Department of Mobility Infrastructure, they're really fantastic at looking at the data, the traffic data, the speed that vehicles are going, the basically the transportation context of the project. But what we need to hear from residents is how that lines up with the lived experience that folks are having. On smaller projects, on smaller local neighborhood streets, we can meet with a couple neighbors, talk about what it's like to cross the street. But in places as big, as vast as a neighborhood scale like East Liberty, it's a little bit more challenging to walk a corridor with 500 people. But what we can do is set them up on the Engage page to be able to drop pins where they can talk about the lived experience that they have, navigating those streets. That then helps DOMI, align that with the traffic data that they're analyzing and come up with plans that are robust and reflect the desires of the community. And so you can see here, both the number of contributions, the number of visitors, and 60% of the neighborhood population was engaged through this process. I talked about this a little bit already, but using the mapping tool where folks are able to drop pins and talk about the specific context at the intersections that they're crossing to get to a store or to take their kids to school, and again help DOMI align that with the data that they're seeing. It's also an opportunity, these pages, again, talking about that living document kind of theme here, both taking in the feedback, then posting a draft plan, putting that out for feedback, and then coming back with a final plan document for people to review and digest. And I think one of the things that, others you might have seen on some of the other pages, but including the faces of the people that are working on these projects. So in this case, Panini Chowdhury, the transportation planner in DOMI who worked on this project, has really gained a reputation in the community, somebody that folks want to see both through the planning process, but also as we move to implementation, basically knowing that there's a real person behind the studies that are being done, the plans that are being developed for certain neighborhoods. So I'm going to hand it off now to Marty to talk about the context for our parks planning as well.
Thanks, Jan. I'm going to be specifically talking about Westinghouse Park, and this is a park that sits right next to a railroad and a busway, so there are a lot of physical and mental barriers in accessing this park. It sits at the convergence of neighborhoods that have pretty stark demographic differences from race, age, renter, or homeowner. And so we knew that going into this process, it was going to be crucial to not only reach current park users, but also those who weren't using the park and figuring out why in some of those neighboring communities. So, one of the kind of main metrics of success that I think we had in this process was that at the end of it, about 12% of our responses came from people who did not identify as being a current park user. And I think that really was a testament to our ability to use these digital engagement tools and, better reach people that, just being in the park in person or having meetings, in the neighborhood, we might not otherwise be able to reach. Additionally, we wanted to make sure that we had really strong youth representation. So we used a lot of the tools and kind of the graphic elements on the site to do 2 full days of engagement with students at a nearby middle and high school. And it was really exciting to be able to go back to those same students during each phase of the park plan and show them how, the input that they gave really helped shape the draft plan and ultimately the final plan. Again, another metric of success at the end of our planning process, about 20% of our responses came from the 10 to 19 age group, which is huge considering the users of the park typically fall, in that if not younger. This project page really allowed us to get a sense of what people wanted to see, everything from recreational amenities. We know pickleball can be a little contentious, especially if people are living nearby and, the noise. And so being able to have that conversation with community members, as well as understanding what types of community facilities, ecological site improvements, and sort of cultural and historical elements people wanted to see in the park. And ultimately, having a site like this allowed us to show the through line through the entire planning process to identify the feedback that led to decisions that were made for the final park plan. And so it's really exciting to think about as this park plan moves into implementation, that all of that engagement will be able to happen on the same page, even though it will be run by a different department within the city, but that people know that this is where that information will be housed and will continue to be a dynamic space where they can engage with park improvements. Everything from being able to tailor the surveys to figure out, are people walking by themselves or are they walking with a dog? Really getting down to that level of detail and just seeing, the response of if people feel like the, various park concepts were meeting their needs, and if not, why not? So that is all for Westinghouse Park, and I will hand it back over to Jan to talk about where the literal and metaphorical money is.
So, I think we talked a little bit about parks, neighborhoods, residential parking, which all touch, certain parts of the city. But when we talk about engagement, we're really trying to engage everybody in the city. And the budget is, maybe the best example of that. And so it's something that everybody is impacted by, but I think historically has not had a ton of transparency. And so over the last couple of years, we've really tried to change the way that we do our budget engagements, including the virtual component here. And so you can see here on this time scale, starting in May of the year prior, we start planning for next year's budget. So May of this year, we'll start planning for the 2025 budget. And that's really like an information gathering opportunity. The departments go out in the community, meet with community members, hear their ideas for what the city should be spending money on, what their department in particular should be spending money on, kind of go quiet a little bit in the summer as our Office of Management budget comes up with a draft budget, releases that draft in the early fall, and starts to get feedback again. So again, using the mapping tools, we're able to see, is there a specific park that needs investment? Is there, a rec center that needs investment? Are there a set of streets that need a little bit of attention in next year's budget? And again, talking here about the living document piece that I think so many of us have mentioned, is being able to look back at the survey results that came in May and see how they stack up to what the Office of Management and Budget put in the draft budget for the next year in the fall. I think this is also a tool, where we're able to get some of the demographic information from our residents. We can see where there's a lot of folks dropping pins, and maybe that's an area that needs a lot of attention. But maybe there's areas of the city where we're not seeing any pins, and we need to up our budget engagement process in those neighborhoods, make sure that they're bought into the budget process, that they have an opportunity to provide feedback as well, so that the budget reflects all of Pittsburgh's neighborhoods. So again, I think this is, a really dynamic process that gives folks an insight into the iterations of the budget, and also an opportunity to, give their own input on what gets funded each year. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it off to Audrey to talk about Engage PGH by the numbers.
Thanks, Jan. I'm super jazzed just hearing all of my colleagues talk about this really incredible work that we've been doing. And I'm so excited that we're sharing it here with you guys today. So to kind of contextualize, in addition to some of the placing that our colleagues have put us in, we now have 208 projects across the platform. And going back to that idea of open, active, and closed, we have 94 projects that are currently open and accepting some kind of feedback. We have 59 that are informing residents about things that are happening across the city and their neighborhood, et cetera. And again, coming back to that idea of making sure that we're always informing people as our baseline for an engagement. And then we have 55 completed projects that are living as that kind of existing archive on the platform. And if you look at some of what some of our top projects were in 2023, you can see that in real time, right? You can see that budget engagement that Jan was just talking about, which, by the way, is one of my favorite uses of Engage PGH in the city of Pittsburgh. You can see how that's something that we saw from beginning to end in 2023. That's one of the top viewed projects. The Oakland Plan, which is a project that came into completion in 2022, is still one of the top viewed projects. So people are going back and seeing, now that it's an implementation, how we're doing, right? Going back to that idea of accountability. I think it's important to talk about, there are a lot of really good things that are happening on this platform, and it's I think I can speak for everyone on the panel that it's one of our favorite tools that we have in the city of Pittsburgh. But I think that it's also important for us to be transparent in this space and just say that we experienced some growing pains. To put on my little cusp millennial Gen Z hat, we girl bossed a little bit too close to the sun. It feels like, with some of the stuff that we were doing at the beginning. It felt like we grew a little bit faster than we were able to keep up with it. And so it kind of felt like we were building the plane as we were flying it. And that led to sometimes the management of the platform feeling a little bit unwieldy. So it was, for a while, when we first started, it was one site administrator, me, for a couple years, who created and approved all of the sites, or all of the pages that were on our Engage PGH site. And to build capacity in that workflow, we started adding team leaders who are that have specific expertises and specific scopes of work to kind of create some capacity and to kind of make sure that we had some subject matter experts that were touching some of those projects. So we built one out for our planning department. We have one for our Department of Public Works and our Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. So some of those top users, making sure that they have a subject matter expert that can kind of help them build out pages, help them decide which tools would be the best for them to use, and to kind of take some of the load off of the site administrator to allow for growing the site as a whole. So folks are still seeing those projects and folks are still visiting the page. And now we are working within that structure. And Laura's going to talk a little bit about some of the directions that she's taking the platform in, which I'm so excited to kick it to her in a second. We are working to kind of further build out process, and we're working to kind of further build out what the roles of each of those people are. And now I am going to toss it over to Laura so she can talk a little bit about where we are and a little bit about her vision for the future.
Thank you so much, Audrey. So yeah, now that we've had a few years with this platform and basically figured out this is an amazing tool and we could be using it more and more, we're just continuing to grow. And part of that has been the addition of my job and my role here at the city, which has been fairly new, but also making sure that we are just really improving upon this user experience. And so look, where are we now? We're thinking about our projects a little more holistically, not just on a project by project basis, but thinking about, in our Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, they're doing these larger initiatives to create safe streets, and they call it complete streets. And so making sure that all the projects housed under that are under one main page, and then have sort of sub pages listed within them, and people can explore that main page and sort of understand what the greater picture is, and then delve deeper into maybe, the street that connects to their house or whatever it may be from there. We're also doing that with our neighborhood traffic calming program, or as Jan mentioned, our budget process is another good example of a main page that we could be building out subpages for. We're also working on making sure this tool is serving people in the way we want it to, by asking the community, how's it going to use this tool, not just here's a tool to get and, for feedback on projects. And so Jan and I and another colleague in the neighborhood services office are working on a survey that we're launching pretty soon to ask people, to tell us what parts of Engage are really working for them, what isn't, what are the pages they visit the most. Obviously, we have a lot of data, as you've seen, but we want to hear in folks' own words how that's going. And then just continuing to grow. I feel like every week, every month, I'm adding more users, internal users who want to use the platform. Colleagues are asking me if I can help them build out pages on the site with content that we've already perhaps shared, or with plans that are already on the city website, but they want to make sure they want to get a piece of Engage and have that feedback aspect included. So that's kind of where things are at this moment. And so now we're just continuing to grow. And as I mentioned, so expanding use of the hub pages, we're establishing platform standards. That's something I've been working on a lot, is making sure, and hopefully these will be informed by the results from that user survey we're about to launch. And then additionally, we're working on making sure people know about Engage PGH. I know we've talked a lot about how much feedback and how many users we have, but we could still be growing. I think there are a lot of untapped communities that could use Engage PGH and be giving us feedback. We've just launched this year a resident e-newsletter as well. And so we often link back to Engage PGH pages and are using them to sort of inform each other. When updates happen on Engage PGH, we put that in the newsletter and then ask people via the newsletter, hey, weigh in on your favorite park design. So we can keep growing in that regard too. A big thing that I am working on, in addition to all of those things on the previous slide, is making sure that this is a sustainable pace. So Audrey talked a little bit about how, growing significantly, and that was awesome. And now we want to make sure that we can sustain these things and not just, burn ourselves out on too much engagement. And so part of that is creating a consistent schedule so that pages aren't just forgotten. It's, again, as I said, my role is pretty new for managing Engage PGH. And so I want to make sure that I'm setting realistic guidelines for the public around when are things getting updated and what can you expect from me. And then also internally making sure our project managers understand when we should be updating pages and not just marching on with a project and then forgetting about the page, which sometimes happens because the page has been sort of this secondary thing that they've had to worry about as their main job was maybe working on engineering a bridge or designing a park. Another thing we're working on is prioritizing accessibility. Obviously, we have users with a wide variety of needs, and sometimes, really basic things like making sure that all of our meeting recordings end up on the page, making sure that there's alt text for every photo. Those are some really basic things that we can be doing to support all members of our community and not just those who are sighted or have physical mobility to get to the in-person meeting and can make their voice heard there. And then the final piece of that is obviously prioritizing our neighborhoods that have been disenfranchised. So other colleagues in the mayor's office have been working really hard to create a map of the high needs neighborhoods throughout the city. And I want to make sure that we are specifically targeting them and turning those folks out either, digitally to join us via Zoom, asking them to asynchronously weigh in on a project if they can't make a meeting, because whatever time and date the meeting happened was not good for them. And just being really strategic about that so that we're not just, allowing everyone with a stable internet connection to show up to the meeting. So, there's a lot of room for growth here, but also I feel so grateful that I've been in this team and the city has been set up on such a great platform as well. And with that, I'm going to throw it back to Audrey.
Thanks, Laura. So just to kind of wrap us up, one of the things that I think is really important to us here in Pittsburgh is that this is something that's continuously growing, right? Laura just gave you a wealth of things that she's doing to increase and improve the uses of the platform. But an important part of that is collaboration with our partners who are also doing this work, right? We have a design that's worked really well for us and that we're continuing to grow, but we are also not the only authority on this. So we want to hear from you. We want to hear from people who are doing the work. So we encourage you to scan the QR code that's on your screen, to check out our Engage PGH platform. And if you have questions or if you have ideas, or if you just want some people who are doing work similar to yours and you want someone to bounce ideas off, reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. And we're excited to continue on this journey of engaging the residents of our cities and towns and organizations far into the future. And with that, I'm going to toss it back to Sophie. Thank you guys so much for having us today.
Thank you, Audrey, and to the entire team for that really beautiful overview of the fantastic work happening in Pittsburgh. I'm going to jump now actually into the back end of the system. You've seen here today quite a bit about what the public interface looks like when people are interacting with Engage PGH. And so we wanted to show you a little bit about what this looks like when Pittsburgh staff are building this out. And to that end, we've made this sort of dummy page and have highlighted a few of the strategies that help Pittsburgh to be unbelievably successful. The first one here is a tool that we call Hotspot within the back end of Social Pinpoint. And what this is going to allow you to do is take renderings, which are a really common tool used in educating the public, and actually animate them. You'll see that here we've got kind of a normal rendering in the background, and this text here is flat. It's not engaging. And if you were using a screen reader for accessibility purposes, you wouldn't be able to know what that text actually says. And so the Hotspot tool is a fantastic way that the city of Pittsburgh has used engagement tools to be more effective in engaging with a broader variety of community members. So here you can annotate the image and have these little pop-ups appear. You can put pictures and images and videos in here. And this text, as you can see, is actually readable. And so this is a fantastic way, not just of making your renderings more interesting and engaging, but also to make them entirely accessible. And that's a really fantastic accomplishment. Another thing that the city of Pittsburgh has done to great success is to use tools like what we call our Fund It tool. This is a tool that will allow you to show trade-offs between different ideas and ask community members to indicate which of these trade-offs they're most interested in. This is really fun because not only can someone come in here and say, I want to spend 10 points on street art, and I actually do want to spend 350 points on a placemaking gateway, but you're also going to be able to see in live time down here where it says 0 supports right now. As more people participated in this, you'd be able to see in live time the aggregate results of what your neighbors are sharing. Social Pinpoint has lots of tools that the city of Pittsburgh also uses quite widely in order to allow community members to have open dialogue and discussion with each other. And those are really exciting and compelling. But this is one that I thought Pittsburgh has used really to fantastic success that allows a more sort of aggregated view of that data and allows immediate transparency of that data. One more thing to show that the city of Pittsburgh does quite often is they add quick polls onto their screen. And so this is just a single multiple choice question that is going to allow you to immediately show a bar graph or a pie chart on the other end. So we're going to build one of these together very quickly. I'm going to jump into editing mode in the system. to show you what this looks like when a City of Pittsburgh employee goes to build this out. So we're going to just drag and drop. It's a really simple interface. And we're going to add a poll onto the screen. You can see this little widget pops up. And we're going to say, how do you currently use Abbey Lane? And then we're going to add a few elements here. So we're going to say, I use it for driving northbound. I use it for walking. And I use it as a cycling connection. And I'm going to click add. And we've now added a simple quick poll onto the screen. And when I exit out of the backend editor here, now I can pretend to participate as a member of the public, and I can say I'm driving northbound. It shows that I've voted here. And when I refresh the page, it'll show me a bar graph of the aggregate results in live time and immediately. So that's just a few of Pittsburgh's really successful tools for using social pinpoint in live action. To that end, I want to really quickly give an overview. At the beginning of the webinar, you would have seen there were two logos on the screen, and these are the two products that we have in our suite. The first is Social Pinpoint, which is what you've been seeing in great detail today. Social Pinpoint is a one-stop shop for all things engagement. It's a completely customized site that's meant to match your government branding in order to increase trust at every interaction with the public. There's over 40 tools in there, and it's going to allow you to create not just fun and gamified engagement, but also really informed education opportunities for the public to participate. The other icon you would have seen up there is Consultation Manager, which is another product in our suite. This is your offline source of engagement. You might currently be using spreadsheets to keep track of all of this information, and Consultation Manager is going to give you a single source of truth across your entire organization. So if you're keeping track of emails and phone calls, this will give you a full picture of that history of interactions with any given community member, and it'll help to maintain institutional knowledge as projects move between departments and as staff change over the years. So through Consultation Manager, you'll be able to do things like send text updates, notify, keep track of when you share flyers and how you're notifying community members with standing in large regulatory processes. It's also going to have really robust reporting for you on the back end as you keep track of all of that huge amount of data. Also want to highlight a couple of our hundreds of customers. And the reason that I want to highlight these is that we're really thrilled to be working with all of these organizations all around North America and globally. And it really helps us to stay abreast of what best practices are in the industry and the tactics and techniques that are helping people to really thrive as engagement professionals. Social Pinpoint is making really diligent effort in our webinar program over the coming months and year to bring these voices like those you've heard today to the front and give you a chance to hear from those executing these best practices. To that end, I'm going to launch a quick poll on the screen. And if you've stepped away from your computer, we'd like to invite you back to go ahead and fill that out. And what you're going to see there is that we'd love to know what additional information would be helpful from Social Pinpoint. Please feel free to indicate any of these options that's relevant to you. If you'd like to, we'd be happy to do a one-on-one demonstration to share pricing about Social Pinpoint, discuss Social Pinpoint's features for online engagement. You can also ask us to give you feedback on your engagement plans and approach for things you're working on right now, or get a sample of online public engagement examples through various case studies. I'm now inviting all of the Pittsburgh panelists to turn their cameras back on, which I see many of them have already done. And I'm going to start wrapping up the poll. So if you haven't filled that out, please go ahead and come back to your computer and take a moment, and I will be closing that poll. And we're going to start the Q&A with our wonderful panelists here in the next moment. We'll be closing that poll in 3, 2, 1. So thanks everyone for your wonderful presentations today. We've got an awesome and very large panel here, and I'm going to try to ask a few questions as we move through here. While we go through these questions, if you're an attendee during this session, please feel free to go into the Q&A section at the top of your screen and add in questions. After this, we're going to take a few questions from the public. So first, I'd love to hear from Audrey and Laura as the current sort of overseers of Engage PGH. Could you share a little bit about what digital engagement means to you and how you balance communication and engagement efforts? If Audrey, maybe you want to start there.
Yeah. Sophie, that's a great question. Thank you. So one of the things that Laura and I, and then by proxy some of the other people on this call talk about a lot, is this idea of communications and engagement really being two sides of the same coin, right? So at the beginning of the presentation, we talked a lot about this idea of using information and informing our residents as a baseline for all of our engagement work. And what that really means is that, you know, our communications is a really important and foundational part that kind of sets Laura up for success in the engagement sphere, both digitally and you know, in different grassroots engagements or different things like that. Yeah, so I think that that's one of the things that I'm most excited about with the platform. What about you, Laura?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things I am working on, as you said, is like communicating, you know, trying to inform people like, hey, this is out here, so that then we can ask them to not just be recipients of information, but partners in all of this and really trust us. I think a lot about building trust, especially in the world we live in today, and trying to make sure that, you know, I can really communicate to people like, this is reliable information, and also this is, and if it's changing, then being transparent about that and doing, you know, I think the bare minimum is like admitting when you make a mistake or telling people when something has changed and just saying we have new information and now we know better. And so I think a lot about how, you know, when it comes to engagement, like it does not mean anything if people don't know about it and if they don't even trust us or, you know, believe that that information is true.
Great point.
Absolutely. I think that speaks to something I've heard a lot of you talk about, which is this idea of how we approach digital engagement in the context of being cognizant of the digital divide. Sharonda, I was wondering if you could kind of speak to that and how you're using Engage PGH and various engagement approaches to address equity and access issues in your projects.
That's a really great question, and I think it's a question that many practitioners are still trying to have a comprehensive answer to. So one of the great things about the Engage PGH platform and its launch right around COVID is that the city and the residents here expect a certain level of engagement, partially because of the Engage PGH platform. And so they look for ways to engage and have their voice heard. Pittsburgh is a very interconnected and deeply interwoven community. And so if they're not using Engage PGH, then they know exactly who to call up at the city and other development organizations to get certain things done. And so it's a really interesting network of people and leaders and folks who can leverage certain relationships. As it relates to sort of that digital divide, again, it's something that we have been mulling over quite a bit. I'm not sure if this was shared earlier in the conversation, but we are about to embark on a very large comprehensive plan for the city of Pittsburgh. It will be the first for the city. The city has been chartered as a city and entity for over 200 years, and so we have not had a fully comprehensive, holistic plan that will guide the growth of the entire city. And so, yes, digital platforms are super important, but that moment to connect individually with residents or connect one-on-one in a more intimate setting, to really get the true pulse of what's happening in communities and neighborhoods is so critical. And so we see it as a both and as it relates to public engagement. And so yes, we will have a very robust digital platform, which will also include Engage PGH, but also what are those in-person opportunities and touch points and events and community meetings and conversations and dialogues that we can have around the comprehensive plan. And so we're really looking forward to being in community, not only digitally but also in person and in the flesh. So thanks, Sophie.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sharonda. I think I want to give Jan and Marty an opportunity to speak to kind of to that point. You two are actioning more sort of expertise driven projects, whether that's environment or infrastructure or transportation. And I'd love to hear from you on how you're actioning engagement best practices as you dive into sometimes quite technical projects that can also be quite fun, and just sort of balancing all of those ideas. So I don't know, maybe Marty, if you want to start and then Jan follow.
Yeah, I can start. I think one of the things, maybe parks are maybe less technical or can be, there's people can kind of enter at the level they're comfortable with. But I think one of the things we have really changed in our practices as a result of switching to entirely digital and then a hybrid approach of engagement is thinking about how are we creating materials that can exist on their own. Previously we would have in-person meetings, probably one per each phase of a park plan. And if people weren't able to attend, that was really their only opportunity to engage at that time. But now, because I might not be literally walking someone through the boards and the process behind the concept or renderings that they're looking at, these materials have to be able to exist on their own, that someone can digest just by looking at the page on their own time with sometimes zero context to it. And so we've really changed our approach to a lot of the graphic elements that we're presenting and being a lot more explicit about what is it that someone's looking at. Everything needs, to be labeled and identifying where this is in the process, what this feedback means and how it will be utilized. And so I think it has just really pushed us to be a lot more transparent and a lot more explicit in all of our engagement, both digitally and in person. Jan, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think one of our, sort of long-standing standards, but one that we're like really trying to re-up with, especially Department of Mobility Infrastructure, Department of Public Works that have some of this more technical presentations, is to get the materials up on Engage and out to constituents at least a week prior to the meeting. And that way, residents aren't having to attend the meeting, digest the material, develop questions, and then ask the questions and get answers. Instead, they're able to, over the weekend, look at what the transportation plan is going to be for a neighborhood, start thinking about the questions, confirm at the meeting that that is actually, what DOMI is planning, and then ask their question if it still hasn't been answered. And I think that opportunity to, get out in front of some of the questions for these folks, helps DOMI come into the meeting with better answers, but also helps people leave meetings with more of their questions answered and not having to come back to us in the weeks and days following asking those questions.
Thank you both. That was all so wonderful to hear your various perspectives. We do have a lot of questions from the audience as well. So I want to pass it over to Dave, who's going to help filter in a couple of those and lead a couple more questions.
Thanks, Sophia, and thank you so much, panel. Wow, this has been amazing. I've enjoyed every minute of this, and I know that the audience online has, because we've got so many questions coming in that are so thoughtful. I know that we've passed the top of the hour. I want to respect people's time. If you need to jump, don't hesitate to go to your next meeting. You can expect an email from us following this up with the recording, the slides, and the link that you need if you're collecting CM credits from the APA. So thank you for joining us if you have to leave. If you have a few extra minutes, I think the panel has a few extra minutes to look at some of these questions. It's if I looked at these questions and I threw them all into a word cloud, the size of the word impressive would be huge. So people are impressed, and some of them are amazed. So the first question is, how big is your planning department? People are wondering how many people are behind the scenes making all of this happen. So somebody's written, how big is your planning department? This is incredible, very impressive. So
Uh, I can answer that. So we are currently a staff of about 50 or so folks, including all of the directors and public engagement specialists.
awesome. Yeah, thanks. So the next question I have here, we're only going to be able to get to a few because I know that people have to run, but let's get to a couple more. How many staff have access to Engage PGH to either create or edit projects within your organization? This person is wondering, and I think this is a really thoughtful question, how do you maintain a cohesive approach across all these projects? And once again, they've said the number of projects on your site is keyword impressive. So is there one person behind the scenes managing the site, or is there many?
I'll jump in and kind of start this, and then I'll let Laura kind of follow up, because again, Laura has taken over that day-to-day management. But the structure that we utilize is we have a site administrator, which at this point is now Laura, who kind of has this overarching view of every project that's on the platform. And then those team leaders, so folks who are in planning, in public works, in mobility and infrastructure, they work with a team leader who kind of helps them create and approve those projects. But the thing that's really great about the Social Pinpoint platform is that it allows us to kind of put the onus for updating on those project managers. So we have about, I think it's about 80, give or take, site users on the platform who are going in and making individual updates to those pages. And then people are following up with their team leaders or with Laura if they have questions about, how do I use a certain tool, or I'm trying to implement this, I'm trying to implement XYZ and it's not working. So they do most of that work to maintain the platform, and then we kind of come in and make sure it's polished, make sure it's up to those standards that Laura's working to build out, and we go from there.
Yeah, and I think I'd just add to that. I mean, there across those 80 people who have site user access, I would say there's like 20 who are really great at making updates, and I guess the math adds up to 60 who have access but only look at it every now and again, depending on what they need or are using it for. And so to just reference back to something I mentioned earlier, like I'm working really hard to make sure that we have a good cadence of doing updates and really standardize. I appreciate the compliment that this is like an impressive number of pages, but I will admit that there are some that have fallen by the wayside and need some real TLC. So that's what I'm working on most immediately.
Right. Well, and I can imagine that you've just gotten better and better at leveraging the right tools for the right project, asking the right questions in the right way. And it just kind of, it's great to have that continuity and that growth over time. And I think, you kind of answered a question that I had in my mind. Obviously, with that many users, the level of technical skills needed to be a user is probably pretty manageable. So, because you can't have, 80 super technical people working at the City of Pittsburgh. This last question, unfortunately, we're only going to have time for one more, but this question gets me in the feels. I can feel this person so strongly. So this person has asked, this is wonderful work. Can you talk to us about the importance of a technology strategy and the city leadership that embraces this strategy being able to launch an effort like this? And this is the part that really gets me. I'm from a medium-sized city with a slow approach to technology adoption and a disjointed, underutilized, and under-resourced relationship with its city slash town technology provider. So can you talk to us, anybody, this is open to anybody, talk to us about the importance of that strategy and leadership support.
I want to give props. I want to give props to Sophie and this Department of City Planning and the folks who worked really hard to launch this platform. Right. I think one of the reasons that we were able to gain the traction that we gained was because the folks who are working on the Oakland plan got traction not only from residents but from the administration, from different departments, and they built something that everyone then wanted to be using. So I give a lot of credit for the success of this platform to the people who started it. I don't think that the platform would be where it is today for me, for Laura, for any of us who are utilizing the platform if those people hadn't gone first.
I would just throw in there too, you're looking at a room of champions. When you're navigating a city bureaucracy, it's important to remember what your North Star is and what your goals are, and figure out how much work you're willing to bite off. And this was an example where we found the champions within the team and really gave them tools to play with and just kind of see where it went. And so that was a really, really fun thing about how this grew within a bureaucracy. I think, Marty, you were a really big part of that story as well. So I'm wondering if you have an ad.
Oh, I wouldn't go that far, but I think just specifically to this question, I don't view this, obviously, if there is, a hesitance where you are to technology, capital T, this does not feel as, it doesn't require any software. It doesn't require, purchasing specific number of licenses or, things like that that can be a big barrier, for other things we have, like our GIS mapping is always, a kind of a scramble for who can get, one of those users. And so I think that it's just a website, like any other. And so maybe trying to approach it that way, and kind of easing people in and trying to meet them where they're at a little bit.
Awesome. Well, and I imagine from the supportive leadership, but also from the public response, it builds over time. So you have a couple of early wins, and then they say, okay, well, let's use this for a couple of other projects and see how it goes. And from the public, if they participated once and they had a positive experience, they might say, hey, that was pretty easy. I'm going to do that again. And particularly because there's so much kind of burnout in the public where, like, what difference is it making? If you can demonstrate that the public input is changing the decisions that are being made, then that really helps to motivate people to say, okay, they listened, they're making changes. And so I feel like there's like an honesty about the approach that is really critical, because people can see through a facade very easily. And I think that what you've done is you've obviously collected up both the leadership and the public trust in the process of public engagement. So well done. We've got more questions, but we don't have more time. So I just want to wrap up and say thank you so much. And with that, I want to thank the panel, and I want to thank Sophia, and of course, I want to thank the American Planning Association and the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation for co-sponsoring today's webinar. Panel, thank you so much for being so generous with your best practices. This is like wonderful how transparent you're being, how you're just sharing all of the lessons learned. You're sharing some of the foibles and some of the best practices, and I really think that it's going to help other agencies raise their game. So much appreciated for taking the time. Thank you to all of the people that we had online. Thanks for sticking around for a few extra minutes. And take good care. We will see you all soon. Take care, everyone.